हम बात कर रहे हैं कि एक इंडिक थॉट में एक द इम्पोर्टेंस ऑफ अर्थ एंड द इम्पोर्टेंस ऑफ द इकोनॉमी. From a theoretical context, आपने बताया, from a historical context, from a civilizational context, we understand the importance of the economy. And I think economy, as we all know, pervades every aspect of our lives. It aspects our lives as individuals, as society, as a country, as a community, as the world. And therefore, it is first very important to understand that where are we as an economy, where are we as a country today? And we'll intersperse this with some of the Indic thought, but let's just first take a balance sheet view of what is the current scenario of the Indian economy. And what are the key elements of both its opportunities and its challenges. The Indian economy, not many people realize, and we don't realize it on a day-to-day basis, is probably a miracle that has happened in the last 75 years. India came out of 1,000 years of colonization, in which maybe the first 700 years of the Islamic colonization were colonization of our social and political structure. But the last 250 years of colonization of the British was nothing but purely economic exploitation. So as you mentioned that India at one point in time was 30-35% of the world GDP. By the time the independence happened in 1947, the English had done nothing for 250 years, which is a long period, which is two millennia, more than 2 millennia, but economically drained India to its last drop. So when we came out of independence in 1947, we were a very, very emaciated nation. Our just to give you a context, today, if somebody dies of hunger, God forbid, some farmer suicide happens, there is so much news. But when India became independent in 1947, before that, go back in history and you will find that India typically lost 1 million people a year, 10 lakh people a year out of hunger and famine on a consistent basis. In 1942, 6 million people died during the Bengal famine when Churchill moved our food onto the boats. So dying of food and hunger and disease in this country was what the British gave us. Literally on a practical basis, as last as the 10, 12, 15 years that we have recorded. Before that, we don't even know. But million people, and then we were only 30 crore people at that time. So whether 1 million people were dying. English didn't leave us with a lot of education and all. Now that as we know, the literacy rate of this country was 6% when the British left us. So the English designed a structure, whether it was our bureaucracy, political structure, only with one objective, and rightly so. They didn't come here for charity, they didn't come here for fun. They came all these thousands of miles for a purpose. The purpose was economic exploitation of India and economic colonization. And the colonization definition is you transfer resources from the periphery to the center. So everything was going from here on a one way to the United Kingdom, which was therefore, if those who have traveled, we have seen all those lavish houses and streets, and London is the Big Ben and the houses. It was all drained from colonies like us. Principally, we were the jewel in their crown, and etc. So that was the India that India had inherited in 1947. At that time, the GDP of this country was $30 billion. And it took India literally 50 years to make that GDP from $30 billion to about $300 billion. And I'm just using billions of dollars to make it easier for people to understand, instead of using lakhs and crores, etc. Because just think of it mathematically, there are a lot of engineering. So 10 times India's GDP increased from 1947 to 1997. From $30 billion to $300 billion. From what took us 50 years, in the next 10 years, from 1997 to 2007, which is probably the time some of you were born and many of you weren't born, India increased its GDP from $300 billion to $1 trillion. So 50 years to go from 30 billion to 300, and then 10 years from 300 to triple that to about $1 billion. In this world of 200 countries, even today, there are only 16 countries that have a GDP the size of over $1 trillion. India became in 2007 a $1 trillion economy, which brought India into the top 16 economies of the world. And therefore, India became a member of this powerful organization called the G20. What then? From 2007 to 2014, which was 7 years from there onwards, what India had done in literally 60 years, India did in the next 7 years. India moved its GDP from $1 trillion to $2 trillion. So what took us 60 years, then took us 7 years. And then from 2014 to 2019, which was 5 years, we went from 2 trillion to 3 trillion. And had COVID not stuck, we would have been 4 trillion, but fast forward that, today we are at 4 trillion. And we are about 75 years into our independence, take a few years here and there. In the next 10 years, what we've achieved in 75 years, we will again double it to 8 trillion. And if we keep a certain growth rate of 6%, 8%, wherever it happens, by the time independence hits us, 100 years of independence hit us, by 2047, will be somewhere between $30 to $40 trillion in our GDP size, and we will by sure be the third largest economy in the world. This is crazy. A country that was drained for 250 years, in 100 years comes back. And you can now see the trajectory. We are already the fourth largest. In 100 years comes back to become the third largest economy in the world, its size of $30-40 trillion. And by the time India becomes a $30-40 trillion economy, or even becomes a $10 trillion economy, there will be at least 2 or 3 states in India that will be over north of $1 trillion in themselves. The countries in their own self, right? So that is a phenomenal achievement about the size and the quantum of India's economic growth. And this is phenomenal because not many countries have done it, and definitely not many countries with our kind of past have done it. China is probably the other exception that did it, but China did not have the colonial hangover that we had for 1,000 years under its as a sword. Other than that, people got a little bit lucky. Somebody got oil, somebody got some natural resources. There are a few spurt of growth. But to shift this over the economic size, over 100, I'm taking 75 years we now know, and 100 years we can predict, it's been a phenomenal economic growth story. Couple on that the other fact, that when we got independence, we started with a very small base, because 2 footballs of our country were split away from us. On the west, which was our wheat growing region, became West Pakistan, and the east, which was our rice growing region, became East Pakistan. We were, at that time, 30 crore people on this land that were left, right? While we grew our economic growth, etc., on that land we have become from 30 crores to about 130 crores people. As I told you, we used to die of famine and hunger at that time. On the same piece of land, today we produce more food that feeds 130 crore, not only 130 crore people, we actually produce more than 15 to 20% food more than we can consume. So while we were economically growing, we have been able to come a long, long way in developing our human capital base in terms of our people and giving them some basic necessities like food, health, home, livelihood, etc. That is also not an easy metric to measure, because if you see the quantum of India, and the reason I'm trying to tell you, because as we dwell deeper into this debate, one big question that comes to us, whose model do we emulate? Given our size and our complexity, who do we take? Should we become another America? Should we become a China? Should we become Brazil? Who do we learn from? And the answer that comes is that we are so complex and so huge, and we have done so many, our size is so big, that we have to be we have to, as Buddha said, our own light. Nobody can come to us. We can follow nobody. There is no example to follow. We have to follow our own example, and in following our own example, we have to go back to our own Indic thought, to our own ancient thought, because in that lies the seeds from which these miracles happen. If you had gone and told the economists in 1947 that India will achieve this, people would have laughed at you. As a matter of fact, people laughed at India in 1947 when the British left. Churchill used to say India is as much of a country as the equator. When it's as theoretical a concept as the equator, and when we British leave, India will collapse as a nation. These are 560 principalities that have just been woven into a country. This will not survive. Then they were convinced that, the India got lucky. They had a guy, Nehru and some people. There was a book written after Nehru. They said by the 60s, India will die. This is not possible for this country. For so many people, nothing common between them, from a person from Gujarat to a person in the northeast, from a person in the Kashmir to a person in Tamil Nadu. How can these people be a country? They will be like the European Union. This country cannot survive. First, it cannot economically survive, politically survive, etc., and it will collapse. But here India is 75 years going forward. As a matter of fact, today the balkanization of India is no longer a prospect. We don't even consider that an issue. Small issues like Kashmir, northeast of Punjab, all sorted out. We are going strength from strength. How did this miracle happen again, which conventional Western model will completely negate and say that this is not possible? This is because if you go down deep into our Indic thought, you will find that the seeds of this miracle, whether we are conscious or unconscious, were already in play, despite the countervailing forces in our architecture, in our system that made this possible. I quote something, in Kautilya's Artha Shastra, the Artha is not just defined, as you rightly said, as the economy. It is defined as the livelihood of people and the earth inhabited by them, not just money. Artha Shastra is the science of acquiring and protecting that earth too. The Kautilyan model is fundamentally built on the realization that the prosperity of the state is the prerequisite for the moral and spiritual fulfillment of its citizens. So Artha is the sustenance or livelihood of man. In other words, it means the earth inhabited by men. So it's the science which means the acquisition and protection of the earth. Book 15, chapter 1, verse 1 and 2. Now in this foundational work, Kautilya defines the scope of his earth entire science. Notice that he does not define earth as gold or currency alone. He defines it as vritti, livelihood. By equating the wealth with the earth inhabited by men, Kautilya shifts the focus from individual hoarding to state-level resource management. The science Arthashastra is therefore is the science of acquisition and protection. Now, in modern context, this translates to the state's responsibility to manage territory and human capital, to ensure the economic survival of its people. This is the birth of the political economy as a systematic discipline predating Adam Smith by 2 millennia. 200 years, 2000 years before Adam Smith, we knew what political economy was. That is, we could weave a nation out of 560 principalities into an economic structure, and now with the elimination of the GST, into one common market. Why? Because, as I said, we knew at that time what political economy was. The reason I quote this is because the answer that the West thought that how will this country will become, did not know that the civilizational wisdom lay in ourselves. While we were that is why democracy also survived here. The democracy also survived. Everybody thought, these poor people with 2,000, 3,000 per capita income today, how will democracy survive? Illiterate people. They did not understand that in our country, the king was never the ruler. He was always the servant leadership model, which was the basis of good governance. When now Mr. Modi articulates good governance all the time, because he said in Arthashastra, in the happiness of the subject lies the king's happiness. In their welfare, his welfare. He shall not consider as good only that which pleases him, but treat as beneficial to him whatever pleases his subjects. The maxim is the bedrock of the Kautilyan statecraft. It predates modern concepts of democracy, accountability, and servant leadership by centuries. Kautilya's ruler is not a divine despot, but a public servant whose legitimacy is entirely derivative of the public welfare. So, in the modern digital replies, this implies the governance should be citizen-centric. That is why in 2026, we are talking about citizen, seva. Because and that is why democracy survived even when our per capita income was what is it. It could not survive in Africa. It could not even survive in Bangladesh. It could not even survive in likes of small countries like Sri Lanka and Pakistan. Same people, same we started. 10 years out of independence, they become a military dictatorship. In India, we have 1.4 million strong army, nuclear power, standing army of 1.4 million. But democracy is safe. Every 5 years, despite how many abuses we give to the politician, one government goes and goes. No general with his army goes and takes over Rashtrapati Bhavan and Parliament. This is because we understood in the Kautilya right what the political economy was, and we created this system because this country will not accept that. So, so our size and our complexity is what we can understand is clearly something that is very uniquely Indian. Then we built an economy which was built on our human resources. When we became independent, when we became a nation state, we realized that we don't have anything, and I'll come to that as one of our channels. We don't have any much natural resources. We don't have oil. We don't have nature's endowed resources as necessarily as some other parts of the world did. Gold, oil, manganese, bauxite, whatever. So our greatest resource was our humans, our people. So we started investing in our people. Not many, again, people realize 6% was the literacy rate when the English left us. Today our literacy rate is touching 75-80%, maybe even higher. All these universities that are coming up. When India became independent in 1947, India was told, why did India become independent, alone for decades? Because after 1945 Second World War, the world was divided into two blocks. There were the Americans who had won the NATO, which had won the Second World War, and the Warsaw Pact, which was the Soviet Union. The Americans and the British were part of the American Pact. Before leaving India, told, now that we are making you independent, we don't want you to industrialize. We don't want you to invest in education. We only want you to invest in agriculture. Become the food basket of the world. We will provide you the machinery, the harvesting, the tools, and the seeds, etc. But on one condition, you will not start any colleges and universities. You do whatever basic, you have to be farmers. Our forefathers at that point, and this was a country where we were dying of hunger. They didn't have enough food. So people went to then Prime Minister and then leaders of the world. I must give Nehruji the credit for this. That they said, start teaching our people, start educating our people. It will take time. So we started and our critics will say schooling, not good. We started from there. We started making our schools, with colleges, the IITs came up, the IIMs came up. With no food in our homes, with no people dying of hunger, we started investing in education. Because again, going back to our Indic thought, we knew that it was in our gurukuls, in India was a Vishwa Guru because India was the leader in the power of the thought. And if we knew that to sustain a political economy, to sustain this, ultimately the game will be of thought leadership. So we have to create the institutions that have thought. So we started creating our IITs, our IIMs, our medical colleges, our social sciences. And today, 75 years, it's a very, very small time. Look how everywhere in the world over, Indian diaspora is rated for the quality of Indian brain. So you have CEOs, CFOs, prime ministers all over the world because of the Indian brain and the quality of India. And this is now translating into our own country. As we now think about our startups, as we think of the new generation, as more and more universities come up, as more and more things. And yes, and the critics will argue, but it could have been, we still don't compare enough. But of course, I was just telling 800 years of Oxford universities versus 75 years of ours. It's not a comparison. We had the Nalanda University. We had 1400 years of the Nalanda universities. But they came and destroyed it. They came and burned 1400 years of library and books. We were investing from 300 AD to 1400 AD, or from 1100 in books and in education and knowledge. We were the center of the world. But it got destroyed because we lost political leadership. It went under the ground, it was destroyed. But we have recreated it. We are recreating it. It will take time. But our Indic thought of putting education as the primacy, because that is why I say I travel all over the world. I only say, India is the only country where, you may be a big man and people may salute you and you're a rich man or you're a powerful man. But the only people whose feet get touched in India are that of teachers and doctors. Right? Because genuinely, I know that they are the people who are building the society. Where does this come from? This only comes from our conventional thought. And the reason I'm saying this is because many of you are young people here. Many of you people with whom the challenge of running this country will come in the future. And therefore, remember that there is no model to emulate. There is nobody who is going to come and tell us, follow this model and this will work. We have to keep going back and understanding where we came from, who we are, and much of the challenges that we are going to face in the future, we have already seen in the past, and we have answers to many of the questions. We just have to contextualize it in today's modern phenomenon. Thirdly, we are a nation with great entrepreneurial ability. And that is why democracy survived. That is why in our economic structure, the growth and the entrepreneurial mindset of the Indian economy or the Indian society was there. And that is why, even after 250 years, they used to call this Sone ki Chidiya. That in 75 years we have come back. The country, I lived in the UK for 10 years and I go there every month. A country which did nothing, but for 250 years, essentially drained money out of you. After 75 years, today is on the verge of bankruptcy. 30% of the people in the UK, with only a population of 60 million, go and eat in community kitchens. They have no food in their houses. So all the money that they looted was finished in 75 years. All the people they looted for 75 or 250 years are back in business in 75 years, right? They are now coming to looking and do a free trade agreement with us, come and partner with us, etc. So this is why, because at the end of this thing, our society was an entrepreneurial society. That is why even when Nehruji and all failed with their attempt to try and force this socialist model on India, it didn't work. We lost some of the decades, and I will come to that this is the challenge that happens when we try to follow other people's model. When we don't understand and believe in the fundamental basis of our strength. And we can talk about, Nehruji actually thought, because he was a very well-educated man, he had gone to the Oxfords and the Cambridges of the world, he actually thought in his right interest that socialism will probably give the answer to a poor economy like India, because, etc. But what he didn't realize was that he didn't have to follow Marx and Engels. He had to look at what was fundamentally Indian, because that model would not survive in India, and we tried and we lost. If the leadership had believed in India and said, what is it that Indians fundamentally do? What does our Artha Shastra say? What is the role of the citizen? What is the role of the then we may have not been in this situation where we lost a couple of decades and came down to bankruptcy and then reverted back in the early 90s back to our model, which is so fundamental belief was lacking. And for example, I'll give you an example of this, the concept of taxation. It's a very Western concept of taxing the rich, they're doing it. And we all follow it. We just take it as a default model. Even in this government, we try to bring in Finnish income tax and try to introduce transaction tax. They killed it. It's not that they said that nobody was willing to listen to it because it is so ingrained, the Western thinking. But the Cotilian model actually had an answer to this. In a poor country like India, the government's fiscals would be far better. It's a proven matter. If it finishes income tax and it starts transaction tax, right? The king should tax his kingdom like a bee harvesting honey from a flower, or a keeper of cows drawing milk without starving the calf or hurting the cow. This is the honeyberry principle of taxation. It dictates the state must collect revenue in the way that does not destroy the capacity of the wealth creators. Satish Deodhar explains that the Cotillon implicitly proposed a linear income tax system that avoided heavy progressive traits which might stifle innovation, which is exactly the Western model of it. Higher your income, higher the tax rate. A king who produces double the anticipated revenue is warned that he eats up the janpad, leaving the country with inadequate resources for future production. This is an ancient warning against the fiscal overreach and high deficit spending that can crowd out private exertion. So, Kautilya views the economy as a biological entity. The unripe fruit represents capital that has not yet matured or a business that has not yet turned to a profit. To tax such entities prematurely is to destroy the source, the mool of future revenue. The lecture logic here is that king's primary fiscal duty is to protect the productive capacity of the subject, as a depleted populace cannot sustain the state in the long term. So what is he saying? That you are an entrepreneurial society. He understands the basic principles of business and entrepreneurship. He says don't tax a business that is just starting. But today's taxation system, which is an inherited system, does not believe in that. It's actually a linear progressive taxation. The more you produce, the more it will tax you. Therefore, creating disincentive. Today, we are in a situation where Indian private sector is not willing to invest in India and is actually taking its money outside India and investing, purely because of an inverted tax model. But very difficult to change because the thinking is so seeped in our mind that there is only one model. Because why? United States does it, United Kingdom does it, European Union does it, so India must also do it. So what I'm trying to say is that the ability of the Indic thought is an important element for leaderships, and sometimes the leadership doesn't get it. Sometimes it gets it. And then I'll finally come to the last point of India's economic, which is the role of the state. Again, there is much discussion about what is the role of the state, and you see a lot of changes in the world global order that is coming these days, from a system of laissez-faire where, the state had completely disappeared to a state which is coming back in a big way in every society. And I think in the next 25 years, you will see the state becoming dominant in every society. What Donald Trump is doing, what is happening in the United Kingdom, what is happening even in many parts of Europe, is nothing but the state reasserting itself. Even Putin, what Russia is doing. And we are reaching to a world where the borders will again come back between the states. And every state will be responsible for developing their own self. That is why we are trying to sign the FTAs, global order is collapsing, people keep talking about supply chains, resilience, etc. Because every country is trying to become self-dependent. This process started somewhere in the early 2015-16, but got highlighted particularly during COVID. And this trend will now continue. So, what is the state in all this? Now, again, in the Western model is still confused about the role of the state, right? What is the extent to which the state can come? The Chinese are very clear because they have a communist model, but the rest of the world is very confused. India need not be confused. India had always a concept that for any political economic survival, the state was the ultimate guarantor of the economy. And somewhere along the process, by the way, we lost this thought. We lost the thought because we thought society was more important than the state. And you know what? We paid the cost with 1,000 years of slavery because of this. Because we did not strengthen the state. We did not make the state resolute. We did not make the state impregnable. And therefore, anybody else came. We realized that that a civilization could not be protected without a state, and therefore everybody came and looted us from Muhammad bin Qasim, who landed on the shores of Sindh, to right till up to the English. It was only post-47 that we now realized the importance of the state, and therefore India went on for a massive defending of the state, including our choice of becoming nuclear, when we did not have even enough money to eradicate polio. We diverted our money from our polio program to our nuclear program. We said one more generation will die of polio or will suffer from polio, but never, ever, ever again we will be slaves. Because we have paid the cost. Modi Sahib gave his speech in Israel yesterday. Only the Jews and us have known the cost of this, beyond the cost of this, of what slavery is. 30,000 women were sold on the streets of Kabul in one night after the third battle of Panipat. They were our mothers and sisters and our grandmothers. We know the cost of slavery. We have borne the cost of slavery, so we never want. So we know the importance of the state. But we already knew the importance of the state. We just lost it over the years. And therefore, post-47, it became very, very important for the state. But the thinking of the Western mind is so much that even after that, while we continue to build capacities of the state, we built a huge army, nuclear, we are the guarantors of security from Strait of Malacca to the Gulf of Hormuz. Nobody can walk into India and now do what had happened to India in the past. We lost the importance of the leadership understanding how important the state was. And it had to take a Modi to come in 2014 to remind us again of what nationalism now means. And I think now by the time, next 10, 15 years, wherever time he stays, by the time, the country's youth actually understands the importance of a nation state. Because, and therefore, if you go back, the definition of an ideal state was already given. The territory should be such that it has an abundance of staples, is capable of supporting the population in support of distress, is easy to protect, provide means of livelihood, is hated by enemies, and is possessed of mines, timber, and elephant forests. Is times of distress. If in COVID, we did not have enough food, going back to an earlier point, how many millions of people would have died? When COVID came, we needed nothing from the world. We had our medicines, we had our food. We even had our bullets to protect ourselves. Nobody could come in. Nobody came. Actually, we became the people to send out that. Why? Because he understood then that the population in the times of distress is there. So Kautilya views territory thoroughly through a functional. A land is only valuable if it is productive. He insists that a ruler should settle empty lands by moving surplus populations, treating human labor as mobile factor of protection. The territory must be self-sustaining unit where the biological and economic needs are met internally, ensuring the state remains hated by enemies because it is impenetrable and resource rich. अब हम आज बात कर रहे हैं सारा का सारा सप्लाई चेन रेसिलेंस लाओ, चाइना पे मत डिपेंड करो, वो यही तो बात है ना. That is it. You must be self-sustainable. You must be internally sufficient. Once you are doing that, you are safe and secure. So, again, if the leadership of the country understands, if the youth of this country understands that the ability of a nation state to secure its economic resources, its primary economic resources, becomes very important. And I'll come to that. That gives me a segue into some of the challenges that we face in our economy and some stuff that people like our policy planners are very, very worried because all the risks aren't gone. It's been 75 years. We made some very good progress, but we have some very significant risks. Significant risks that can put us back into the situation that we were in 1,000 years. And therefore, it is important that our youth of this country understands the risk and works on those, because otherwise we can easily go back to where we were. We can again have a Somnath happening in the state and we can have people coming 17 times to burn it down and loot it. Let me give you an example of resource sufficiency. India does not have the natural resources that India needs to be able to be the world's largest or important economy. In 2014, when this government came to power, our energy dependence on imports, which is oil, coal, was 75% of our GDP, of our energy needs. The leadership understood this is so difficult because you can't fight a war. You can't say it's a distress if 75% of your energy needs are getting imported, right? We must have to cut it down because we have to have the energy ourselves. So we started the solar mission, wind, renewable. Modi ji did everything. We wanted to cut it down to 65% of our needs of our energy imports. Last 15 years, we have worked very, very hard to try and ensure that our energy needs come down. After 14 years or 13 years, today it stands at 85% of our things. We have actually not been able to reverse it, we have gone the other way. Today we depend on 85% of our energy needs are imported. To give you an example, India spends $162 billion on energy imports every year. That is money that we earn, that we send abroad because we don't have oil and we don't have gas or we don't have coal. As against that, we only spend $100 billion, both public and private, on our education and $90 billion on our health. $142 billion of our money goes into decorate the palaces of these rich kings in Saudi Arabia and UAE and all over the places. Our rickshawala rides the risk. Your parents eat one meal less, right? But that money goes there because we don't have the technology today, because we don't have oil. We are not, to the Cautilya's point, fully resilient in ourselves. So there we have to buy oil. That is why we have to deal with Russia and we have to deal with Saudi Arabia and we have to deal with everybody else because we don't have oil. Now, can we find a solution? As people like myself right now, we are working on some of these things. Because tomorrow is a world of data. We have to run data centers. We have to run artificial intelligence. It will need huge amount of energy. Only those people who have access to energy will be able to play. Now, where does that leave us as a nation? It makes us exceedingly vulnerable, to Cautilya's point, because we are not self-sufficient. So this is a one very, very big challenge that we think about every day, and that is sieged of the thing. We are trying to minimize it, but as I said, minimization is not helping us. So we are shifting the other way because the onslaught is so high that so we have to come, and therefore we are looking at young people to find answers to some of these problems the country has. Secondly is our per capita. Yes. We are a big nation. We are a, we have achieved this economic size. But today our per capita still stands at about close to $3,000. To become a developed nation, we need a per capita of about $12,000. Unless the individual goes back to to a level where he or she is self-sufficient, the country will not progress. We'll still see corruption, we'll still see mismanagement, we'll see all the problems that we see in society because our per capita income isn't there where it should be, which means we need to grow faster, we need to accelerate faster because we have a large base, we need to lead to greater empowerment. I read some of the most heinous crimes against women, against marginalized society in our own society. It makes us feel, where are we, who are we, right? That's because even in our own model we understood that prosperity was a very, very key importance. They say in the Indic that sukh ka mulya artha hai. You cannot be happy till you are prosperous. So now at an individual level मैं ला रहा हूँ, मैं आपको बोल रहा हूँ, तभी तो इंडिया से लोग माइग्रेट करते हैं, तभी तो we go for a better living to the Middle East, to America, to everywhere else, because यहाँ पे हम 2,500-3,000 हज़ार पर कैपिटा इनकम पे हैं, वहाँ पे 12,000-14,000 की जिंदगी मिलती है, घर में बिजली आती है, सड़कें साफ हैं, लॉ एंड ऑर्डर सेफ है, एक्सेट्रा एक्सेट्रा. तो हमें अगर एक सोसाइटी की तरह करना है तो इंडिया हैज़ टू ग्रो एट अ मच फास्टर ग्रेट रेट एंड इंडिया हैज़ टू हैव मच मोर डिस्ट्रीब्यूटिव जस्टिस सो दैट वी कैन रेज अवर पर कैपिटा इनकम. बिकॉज ये वेस्ट के लिए तो बड़ा मार्जिन वियर्ड कॉन्सेप्ट होगा या इक्लेक्टिक होगा कि इनकम डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन क्या है, इक्वालिटी ऑफ इनकम क्या है. हमारे लिए तो ये बहुत प्रैक्टिकल प्रॉब्लम है, हमारे लिए ये प्रैक्टिकल सिचुएशन है कि हम कितनी जल्दी इस पर कैपिटा को इक्वली डिस्ट्रीब्यूट कर सकें सो दैट हम एक इगैलिटेरियन सोसाइटी को ला सकें जहाँ पर हम as a nation डेवलप करेंगे. और उसके लिए because we understand that unless we have individual level prosperity, national level prosperity does not mean, it's no consolation कि one industrialist is worth billions of dollars and the rest of the society does not have that kind of basic amenities. So that's the other challenge that the Indian economy faces. So natural resources, per capita distribution. Then we also face a big problem in our competitiveness and productivity. So while our economic size is hugely given by our size of our market, etc., we are still not a very productive economy. We're still not a very competitive economy. We still don't produce stuff that is world. We're not net exporters of the world. Our global trade is only 2%, 2.5% of the world trade. And history has shown there are only two ways to become rich. As the Cotilian model also talks about trade between janpaths. You can either colonize the world, which is what the West did after the Industrial Revolution, or you can export to the world, like what China did to achieve prosperity. There is no third model available. How do you bring wealth from outside to you? Either through trade or through looting. Looting is not an option. So therefore, it becomes trade. We try to do it with services. We produce brains, etc. But there's only limited level. We've come very far, but now we are seeing with technology and AI how much there is a cap to it. We never did anything with manufacturing. We never manufactured anything, and that is again goes back to our problem of when leadership does not understand the full belief, or does not fully understand its own strengths, and does not go back to its own way of thinking. India allowed its manufacturing. India has had some problems, some strategic mistakes it's made on its political economy journey. One such mistake, like energy, was India's manufacturing to fall from 25% of its GDP to about 14% of its GDP. Today, Indian manufacturing stands at 14% of its GDP, which is a very, very unhealthy level. Indian economy should have at least been 25. India thought that we could migrate people from agriculture to services. But as we realized that that's not possible, because services cannot absorb the kind of labor workforce that is needed, that comes into the economy. Today, 1 million people join the workforce every month. That's the size of 10 lakh graduates or young people are coming into the workforce. We can't absorb them all in the services sector. We have to absorb them in the manufacturing sector. But today our manufacturing is only 14%. We don't produce a product that we can export to the world. We don't produce cars, we don't produce air conditioners, we don't even produce mics that are of world quality, or even pens of world quality that dominate the world. In a world where everybody wants to produce. Because the world is... So again, going back to your own model, if you had understood that healthy balance in an economy was between manufacturing, services, agriculture, trade, you would have never let manufacturing fall. But today it has fallen. And now India is grappling of how to come back with it. That's why Make in India, Invest India, all these programs are being launched. And of course, hopefully we will try to claw back, but it will take us at least 100 years, if not more, to do that. In a world which is increasingly becoming different. And if we don't do that, we are running a big risk, or we'll never hit the 12,000, 13,000 per capita income of a developed world. We'll get caught in what is called as a middle trap economy. And therefore, this competitiveness and productivity is going to be one of our biggest challenge. And then, as we were discussing today morning, when the aim becomes impossible, human lethargy normally sets in. So people say, क्या फर्क पड़ता है, होने वाला है ही नहीं तो क्यों मेहनत करें, फिर आराम ही करते हैं. क्या जो ये चाइना को लगता है कि हम दुनिया की मैन्युफैक्चरिंग को डोमिनेट करते थे, तो 18-18 घंटे शिफ्ट करते हैं. जापान को लगता था कि हम दुनिया को कॉन्ट्रीब्यूट करते, तो लोग काम करते करते टेबल पे मर जाते थे. अब इंडियंस को लगता है कि तो कुछ बदलने वाला है नहीं, तो छोड़ो, फिर 2 घंटे काम करें, 4 घंटे काम करें, what difference does it make? So we run the risk of being a middle trap economy unless we can see a clear light of how we can get to the competitiveness and productivity that we need. And then finally, I will come to our last challenge that we face. And then the last challenge that I want to talk to you about is artificial intelligence. And we are going into a world which is going to be a very, very different world from the world that we lived in. But not a very different world if we understood our own model. We always, as I said, understood the product of thought leadership. That's why we say, "Hum Vishwa Guru banna chahte hain." We know that it is the thought which is mind over matter always. And again the world forgets it, and again the world gets reminded. ठीक है, अब ये आर्टिफिशियल इंटेलिजेंस आ रहा है, ये दुनिया में डिसाइड करेगा कौन इकोनॉमिकली कॉलोनाइज करेगा. अब आप सोचो, हमारे पास 25 साल का रन था. 25 साल का रन था. हम 2000 में हमने आईटी के अंदर हम घुसे, हमने इन्फोसिस, विप्रो जैसी कंपनियां बनाई. ठीक है, हमने 25 साल में कोडिंग करी, हमने बैक ऑफिस किया, हमने माइग्रेशन किया, वेल्थ क्रिएट करी, लेकिन हमने R&D में पैसा नहीं स्पेंड किया. हम भूल गए भाई कि माइंड ओवर मैटर, ये जो कौटिल्य प्रिंसिपल है ऑफ ब्रिंगिंग थॉट लीडरशिप. अब आउटकम क्या? 25 साल बाद हमारे कंपेटिटर्स ने इसमें काम करना शुरू किया। आज ही कल मैं कहीं पढ़ रहा था कि अगले कुछ साल में ये सारी कंपनियां खत्म हो जाएंगी, जीरो। क्योंकि जब टाइम आया हमने उसको स्पेंड नहीं किया, अपने आप को हमने अपनी को थॉट लीडरशिप को नहीं बनाया। आज हिंदुस्तान, जस्ट टू गिव यू एन एग्जांपल, अब हम एआई और उसकी रेस में जा रहे हैं। टुडे अमेरिकन जीडीपी इज 24 ट्रिलियन। अमेरिका स्पेंड्स, somebody has to do quick maths for me, 4% of that 24 trillion on its R&D. Plus America is spending $500 billion a year for data sciences, for computing, for quantum, etc. 500 semiconductors. ठीक है, तो 4% of 24 trillion. China is 19 trillion, spending 3% of its GDP on R&D. We don't know how much they are spending in terms of maybe about 100 to 120 billion dollars a year. India is 4 trillion. We spend only 0.6% of our GDP on R&D, of which also 0.6%, 80% government spends on this Indian Agriculture Research Institute, this institute, research. उसमें भी 80% में से 70% goes in salaries, building, maintenance. Private sector only spends 20% of that 0.6%. Private sector is buying luxury cars, big houses, fancy weddings, all the other stuff, right, of Indian billionaires. 0.6%. And India spends about 10 to 11 billion dollars on AI. Against an enemy who's spending $500 billion, spending 4% of its GDP. It understands the importance of thought leadership. This is exactly how colonization happens. You have to go, if you ever go to England, you will find, you go to a university called Oxford University, you will find that if you go to Oxford University, in the center of Oxford University, there is a museum of Oxford University. That museum shows that somewhere around 1200 AD, 1300 AD, when they started doing R&D, they started making the microscope, the compass, the telescope, the gunpowder, the radio, etc. They did that for 300, 400 years. It was quiet. As Lenin used to say, there are decades when nothing happens, and then there are weeks when decades happen. And then, Lord behold, 1700s, because of the work they were doing between then, they had the Industrial Revolution. They had the Industrial Revolution, they got the steam engine, they got the gunpowder. A small country, I don't know what was the population then, or 20, 13 million total, became so big that it colonized India, Africa, all over the world, and they said, the sun never sets on the British Empire. That is it. This is history. And that's exactly what is happening again. Now in a different way, in a way of digital colonization, in a way of digital dominance. And there are 2 or 3 big powers. 180 nations, 190 nations are just observers. Will India be an observer, or India will be a player? India will try to defend itself or not will depend upon how much of thought leadership and investment we do in this. So, I'll wind up by saying that, listen, we have lots of challenges, but we have great advantages. I was talking about AI, and AI is nothing but data. AI is nothing but data. The oil of AI, because all your LLMs, all your models depend upon how much data you can feed into it. They have only data for 200 years. We are a civilization, we have data for 3,000 years. Civilizational data. If we have our own LLM models, we can start fielding our data. Nobody has data better than us. If we go back to our Indic thought and start realizing, what do we know about sustainability? What do we know about groundwater conservation? What do we know about, and then we start feeding that into our modern models. Nobody can beat us, as I said, because nobody has that civilizational continuity as we do. So, our challenge now is, how do we do it? But if we may manage to do it, they will be only able to figure out, they are only operating out of 200 years of data. We have, as I said, we knew political economy 2000 years before. So the challenge now for India is very, very quickly try and understand these old, new paradigms, understand them, but also translate into them our old Indic thought as the power. The second, I'll tell you, the Western model believes the individual is the final unit of economic production. They have a society today which is completely dysfunctional. Despite all the prosperity, human productivity is going down, relationships are breaking down, communities have collapsed, religion is over, faith is over. We always believed that the lowest common denominator of economic production is the family. You strengthen the family, the whole economic architecture becomes strong. Can we play on that? Can we play on the strength where everybody else's productivity will go down, but our productivity will enhance because we come out of families. We don't see ourselves as individual success. But if we go and follow the same Western model, we are also going to see the same things that are happening. Split societies, dysfunctional families, broken relationships, and loss of productivity. But the question is, answer to this lies. Answer to this lies, what is the role of the family? What is the role of the community? What is the role of the village? Temples weren't centers of just religion in India. Temples were a center of great economic activity. Every temple was a place where the temple economics played a very, very important role in the ability of transaction. Because inside the temple premises, you never lied, you never cheated. You did trade because you saw God as an observer of your transaction. So the legality and the contract was done in the eyes of the God. So the question is, can you now translate that in modern economics principles, in modern framing? There is no point framing laws, as I said, based on what Adam Smith said or what the corporate governance of the West lies. We don't produce companies that are needed to be on corporate governance standards of the West. And what is it that it is showing? Look at Bill Gates, look at others. This is their corporate governance. So what is our corporate? But where do we? So for that, we need to what I come as the greatest challenge, and then I will stop and go back and hear all of you, is about leadership and thinking. The challenge today of India is that do this leadership and its leadership's challenge, which includes all of you. You are that small percentage of Indians who have been lucky to have gone into higher education, who represent a very marginal part of India. It may look to you that you are surrounded by all people like you, but you are the leaders of tomorrow. You are the people who are going to shape the future and destiny of this country. The question is how much of self-belief and how much of your own self, how much of your own DNA, how much of your own background, how much of your own history, how much of your own wisdom do you understand? And how much of it are you able to bring to bear it on your own life in building out solutions? The problem of colonization, the problem of slavery is that it kills your self-belief. It kills your self-confidence in yourself. And I think when history is written, one of the biggest contributions of Modi ji will be that besides the roads and the ports and all, is the belief in the self-belief that he put back in Indians. And I'll finish with a story on this, that in 1982, India went to play cricket. India was a very marginal cricket playing nation till the 80s, that many people not know. But, and much of our cricketing talent used to come out of one or two places. One of them was a place called Shivaji Park in Bombay, where a certain set of people, from privileged people, we were but Indians were so-so players. Very good gentlemen, they had some good, but they used to win. So in the 82 World Cup in England, India went to play, but India bought tickets. From all the players bought tickets, Delhi, London, New York, because they thought that after one or two matches they will lose and they will go on holiday with their families and enjoy the rest of the thing. In that team was one gentleman by the name of Kapil Dev, who came from a village of Haryana. He did not know all this. Anyway, he did not know what defeat was. He had never been outside India. He had just gone to play. He went and played, and India won the 1982 World Cup, out of everybody else's expectations. The minute India won the 1982 World Cup, India's mindset changed. It took some time, but India's talent decided to change. India stopped sending its cricket players out of Shivaji Park and sons of kings and princes, or boys of Doon School, etc., who played cricket, or Jamnagar and all. It started coming from the villages, from the Jharkhands and the Dhonis and small towns. And since then, Indian cricketers are no more gentlemen. They don't know, but they go and compete and win match after match because they have a belief in India. They have a belief in themselves. Nobody can make India lose a match on its own. India will fight to the last ball and to the last run. This is what a mindset changes. This is what happens. And since the last 20 years, India has won more matches and more games and more trophies than India had ever won in 100 years before that in cricket. India has been playing cricket for a long time. But so it is about the leadership, it's about the belief, it's about the self-confidence. And today, when Mr. Modi says India can do it, when India says it will be the Vishwa Guru of 2047, when India says that it will do it, it is a statement backed on the basis of all these young Indians sitting in this room who think they can do it, who think we can transform the future. And to that extent, as people working out of engineering, economics, and all these areas, you will play an important role. So with this belief that all of you will be engines of the future economic growth, based upon India's deep Indic thought, and a complete change in my lecture, which was not originally proposed, I thank you all for giving me this opportunity. Thank you very much. Jai Hind.
Thank you so much, sir, for articulating the philosophical and strategic dimensions of Earth with such depth and clarity. We shall now open the floor for question and answers. I request volunteers to please pass on the mic. Sir, I have one question to start with.
Hello.
Yeah. Sir, you talked about Kautilya's Arthashastra, and when we compare it with modern Indian framework, and you also talked about literacy rates and growing GDP from 30 to 300. And having said that, are we truly creating wealth creators or just merely job seekers?
We cannot be a $30 billion economy by making job creators. Then we'll only just be a market, and a big market. We will only be able to create the size of the GDP by creating wealth creators, people who are able to multiply the productive capacity of the economy. So I think the whole emphasis on Startup India, the whole emphasis on Make in India, the whole ability to even reduce corruption in this country is to be able to give people a chance to try out their abilities, to be able to create jobs, and to stop this match fixing that happened earlier, where some people who were better positioned to be able to get the licenses and the bank financing, etc. So the emphasis is that we try and create not only on an entrepreneurial mindset, but we also try to create a lot of what I would say enabling conditions for people to be wealth creators in the future.
Thank you, sir, for throwing light on this. Do we have questions from audience? Yes.
Just introduce yourself and ask a question.
Namaste, sir. Myself, Neeraj Chow. I'm a student of MBA, final year. So my question is that as India is growing and is at a verge of becoming a power in next few years, still there are many my friends and relatives who emphasis on moving abroad and settling outside India. How to convince them that no, India is also growing and India is also becoming a power that is going to compete the world? Because when we say that India is growing and competing, they counter us that no, India is not growing, like there are many villages still over there are no job opportunities over here. How to counter that, sir?
Yes, I think a very practical question, and I appreciate your honesty. But you see, we are all victims of the past, and I use this term called future ready. God has given us eyes in the front, not at the back. But the problem is that many of our relatives, our old people, they look at the world from the eyes of the past, their own lived experiences. You are all young people. You are going to live in the future, not in the past. So you have to see where the future is. And the best way to demonstrate to them is to be able to, by your own actions. Look, today you can start new companies in India, you can find new jobs in India, you can be mobile in India towards different opportunities. For example, I just gave you, $142 billion is the energy imports of India. This is what India is importing. Reverse it, 142 billion is the energy opportunity in India. Nowhere else in the world is there some energy opportunity. If anybody can produce a product that India can produce oil or gas here in India through your innovation, imagination, you can sell here. After all, today also India is paying for it. So why are you looking at it as, where else will you find the market? Why did we, I went, in my 90s, I went to the US and overseas to study and work. Why? Because there were no opportunities here. But if the opportunities were here instead of there, I would not have gone there. Tomorrow, the foreigners will come and work here because the opportunities are here, not there. So I think the best way for you to, obviously you have to convince your parents and friends, but you have to first believe that, and if you are an MBA student and you are the data only suggests, and you are already seeing that. You go to any of the foreign countries today, there is so much of backlash against immigration, they are also stopping the visas, they are also not, they just want you for your money to study, they don't want to give you jobs because they don't have the jobs to give you. So I don't think that today's youth should be even thinking about going abroad and settling abroad, because they are, that is boarding the wrong train in life. The opportunity is here and now, here in India.
Sir, myself Khushi Kanwar, I'm MBA student. And my question is that we have made revolution in the Indian banking system and digital payment with UPI and QR code. But yet these technologies are not adaptable by Western countries as we are adapting their technology. Why is it so?
No, it's not true that they are not. They are adopting it when we are trying to push it. We have something called as an India stack, which includes the trinity of the Jandhan, Aadhaar, and the bank accounts. And we are heavily pushing it into Africa, which is the first place, because we have been able to customize it at the cost at which Africa can afford it. In some of the Western countries already had their models like the Visa and the other payment systems. They are going to give it a little bit more tough time for us to enter those markets, but it will happen. Recently, I don't know if you heard the news, and because I was part of it, Paytm has announced its foray into the Middle East. They've signed up and they're going to, and I think in 4 or 5 years, Paytm will dominate, because at their price point and at their ability to produce digital transfer, nobody else can do it. So, sooner or later, Indian product with its cost competitiveness, provided it keeps the technology, provided they keep investing, because the other players like Swift and all, who are their competitors, are heavily investing in technology to try and not let these low-cost producers enter their market. So, India is trying to do it, but it will depend upon how good our product is and how cost-effective it is.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Any other question? Yes, at the back.
नमस्ते सर, माय नेम इज लक्ष्य सिंह रावत फ्रॉम कंप्यूटर साइंस डिपार्टमेंट. सर, मेरा पहला क्वेश्चन ये है कि हम ऑलरेडी ट्रेड में बहुत ही बड़ा स्कोप है हमारे पे ट्रेड पे, पर उसके बावजूद भी रुपीस डॉलर से हम लोग बहुत कम है, क्योंकि रुपी का कंपैरिजन डॉलर से किया जा रहा है. एंड कुछ लोग ये भी कहते हैं कि इट वुड नो डाउट कि एक दिन 100 रुपीज़ भी $1 के बराबर हो सकता है. पहला क्वेश्चन ये कि इसमें हम लोग क्या सोच सकते हैं. दूसरा ये कि जैसे कि आपने कहा कि लास्ट 75 ईयर्स में हमने इकोनॉमी में बहुत बड़ा जंप किया है. हम ट्रिलियन में और आई थिंक 4 ट्रिलियन इकोनॉमी में आ चुके हैं, जैसे कि आपने कहा है. एंड बाय 2047 तक हम 40 ट्रिलियन तक का हम लोग स्कोप देख सकते हैं. पर मेरा क्वेश्चन ये है कि अभी जैसे कि सारी कंट्रीज भी बढ़ रही हैं और सारी इकोनॉमीज भी उसके हिसाब से बढ़ रहे हैं, तो 40 ट्रिलियन उस टाइम के हिसाब से कि हम कितनी कंपनीज से कितना आगे रहेंगे, कितना पीछे रहेंगे, उसके हिसाब से भी कि हम लोग डॉलर के 40 ट्रिलियन जो रुपी का हम लोग इकोनॉमी सोच रहे हैं, उसमें हम लोग डॉलर्स के हिसाब से डॉलर के कितने कंपैरिजन में रहेंगे कि हम लोग उससे ऊपर जा पाएंगे, कि वे अभी की स्थिति से हम लोग बेटर हो पाएंगे. तीसरा क्वेश्चन, इकोनॉमिक डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन. तीसरा क्वेश्चन ये है कि हम लोग अगर जब इतनी बड़ी इकोनॉमी हो पा रहे हैं, इसकी क्या गारंटी हो पाएगी कि इकोनॉमिक डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन भी उतना बेहतर हो पाएगा, क्योंकि हम लोग इकोनॉमिकली थर्ड लार्जेस्ट इकोनॉमी में हम लोग गए हैं, बट इकोनॉमिक डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन उतना अच्छी तरीका है नहीं. तो इस पे अगर हम लोग इसमें आप लोग थोड़ा लाइट दे सकते हैं तो फिर.
चलिए, मैं आपके तीनों क्वेश्चनों का एक एक करके जवाब देने की कोशिश करता हूँ. हो सकता है 1-2 में मिक्स भी हो जाए आंसर. देखिए, पहला बात आपका ये कि जो रुपी का डेप्रिसिएशन है अगेंस्ट द डॉलर, वो करीब रुपी हर साल 6% गिरता है अगेंस्ट द डॉलर ओवर द लास्ट 25 ईयर्स 30 ईयर्स. उसका कारण ये है कि हमारा जो बैलेंस ऑफ ट्रेड है वो हमारे अगेंस्ट है. हम अभी जैसे मैंने आपको बताया, इंपोर्ट ज़्यादा करते हैं एक्सपोर्ट से ज़्यादा, तो हमारी जो करेंसी है वो रिलेटिवली हर साल घटती है. वो हमको थोड़ा फ़ायदा भी देती है कि उससे हमारे एक्सपोर्ट्स कंपेटिटिव होते हैं, लेकिन हमारा इंपोर्ट बिल भी बढ़ाती है. इसका एक ही विकल्प है कि जिस दिन इंडिया का बैलेंस ऑफ ट्रेड पॉजिटिव हो जाएगा, उस दिन रुपया गिरना बंद होगा. जब तक ये नहीं होगा, रुपया गिरता ही रहेगा विज़ावी द डॉलर. तो अगर हम ये देखें कि इसका कारण यही है, जैसे मैंने पहले कहा था कि हमको ग्लोबली कंपेटिटिव होना है. अगर हमारी करेंसी को भी इतना स्ट्रांग होना है कि वो हमारी इकोनॉमिक एक्टिविटी को रिफ्लेक्ट करे. अगर हमारी इकोनॉमिक एक्टिविटी
विज़ावी हमारे कंपेटिटर्स, बिकॉज हम एक एब्सोल्यूट वर्ल्ड में ही नहीं रहते, एक रिलेटिव वर्ल्ड में भी रहते हैं. अगर हमारा कंपेटिटर यूनाइटेड स्टेट्स है, चाइना है, अगर उनके अगेंस्ट हमारा ट्रेड हमारे फेवर में नहीं है तो हमारी करेंसी कमज़ोर होती जाएगी. और उसमें एनर्जी सबसे बड़ा हमारा फैक्टर है, क्योंकि हम वैसे मैंने कहा अब 85% अपना एनर्जी इंपोर्ट करते हैं. जहाँ तक रही कि हम 2047 में कहाँ होंगे, जब हम 40 ट्रिलियन देने का, हम दुनिया की तीसरी लार्जेस्ट अर्थव्यवस्था होंगे. अभी हम फोर्थ हैं, तो हम थर्ड होंगे. एंड ऑन डॉलर टर्म्स, इन रियल डॉलर टर्म्स, तो वट एवर बी द करेंसी रेट, ये तो क्लियर है कि हम चाइना और अमेरिका हमसे बहुत बड़े होंगे और हम तीसरे होंगे बाय द टाइम 2047 कम्स, और 30-40 पे. पर बट इट विल बी लाइक फॉर लाइक, तो इट्स नॉट कि उससे डॉलर रुपए का कोई फ़र्क पड़ता है. डॉलर टर्म्स में हम 40 ट्रिलियन के आसपास होंगे और तीसरी लार्जेस्ट इकोनॉमी होंगे. और जो आपका तीसरा सवाल था कि डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन के बारे में, तो यार वो आपका बड़ा वैलिड सा सवाल है कि हम कैसे इसको इकोनॉमिकली डिस्ट्रीब्यूट करेंगे. लेकिन डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन इंडिया के अंदर भी एक प्रॉब्लम है, क्योंकि डिस्ट्रीब्यूटिव जस्टिस पाने के लिए पर हमको इकोनॉमी को डिस्ट्रीब्यूट करने के लिए वो करना पड़ेगा. लेकिन ग्लोबल जो थिंकिंग है, जो ग्लोबल वर्ल्ड ऑर्डर है, जो ग्लोबल वो है, उसमें अभी कोई मॉडल नहीं इमर्ज हो पाया है जो आपको इकोनॉमिकली डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन दे. वेस्ट जो हमसे आगे है, वहाँ तो इकोनॉमिक डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन की और प्रॉब्लम है, वहाँ तो इकोनॉमिक इनइक्वालिटी की और प्रॉब्लम है. इंडिया भी वही मॉडल फॉलो कर रहा है. तो अगर इंडिया भी वही मॉडल फॉलो करेगा तो मुझे नहीं लगता कि इंडिया का इकोनॉमिक डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन डिस्पाइट इट्स इकोनॉमिक ग्रोथ बेटर होगा. उससे वर्स ही होगा, बिकॉज जिन्होंने आपसे पहले किया है उनका भी वही आउटकम आया है, तो आपका भी वही आउटकम होगा. इसलिए इसके लिए बहुत बड़ी आवश्यकता है कि इंडिया कम्स अप इट्स ओन इंडिजिनस मॉडल ऑफ इकोनॉमिक डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन. वी डोंट हैव एन आंसर येट, वी don't have a solution yet, but and we don't have political consensus on yet. हम वही कर रहे हैं जो सारी दुनिया कर रही है कि आप प्रोग्रेसिवली टैक्स करो, इकोनॉमिकली ग्रो करो, अर्बन सेंटर्स बनाओ. तो मुझे नहीं पता, आई डोंट हैव एन आंसर कि ये डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन कैसे कम होगा. मुझे तो लगता है ये बढ़ेगा, इकोनॉमिक इनइक्वालिटी बढ़ेगी अगले 25 साल में, अगर ऐसे ही चलता गया तो.
Next question.
Hello, sir. I am Hetvi Sharma. I am a student of BBA. Throwing reference to the Make in India drive that you talked about, where do we as an individual user or a business person stand? Because even as we speak right now, India is outsourcing so much technology and resources from China and West itself. Where do we stand as an individual, and what measures should we take to excel and to promote the Make in India drive?
So, are you asking this question at an individual level, as a person, or is it a policy level?
Even as an individual and even as an aggregate, because as an individual we see that cheap products are beneficial for us and we opt for those, and businesses opt for cheaper products because they are outsourced and so they are getting at cheaper cost, while as the products made in India are not so cheap. So where does an individual stand on it, and where does the aggregate business stand on it?
So I'll try and answer it first at an individual level, then as an aggregate level. See, at an individual level, you are absolutely right. In your question is the answer. Only a cheap product will sell. It doesn't matter whether the cheap product comes from China or India or America, because the consumer will only buy what is cheap. So the answer to that question is produce a cheap product in India, which is cheaper than China and America. Now, how can you do that? Well, you live in India and you know India's problems the best. Chinese and Indians and Americans or United Kingdom or France produces what they can produce best for India's market. They will try to sell. They try to create a demand. India does not need hand cream. Let's say you apply. They create the demand for hand cream and then sell it to you because they've got great marketing or great brand, etc., right? If you start producing products in India at a manufacturing level that genuinely addresses India's problems, simple answer. India, people die of mosquito bites. Find a mosquito cream that doesn't smell bad. France is not producing that. If you produce that, people in India will buy it. Right? Because if presume that, so when you start producing for India in trying to solve, and this is the thing I'd say to all the startups, rather than trying to become a Facebook or a Google or trying to compete with their startups, find what do Indians need. And if Indians can produce for India, then you are got a domestic market that is there. It's only when we don't produce for our own people start thinking कि यार वो फेसबुक मेरी नीड सर्व करता है, इसलिए मैं फेसबुक में जाता हूँ। मैं इंस्टाग्राम में बहुत अच्छे ट्रैवलर की फ़ोटो देखने से अच्छा कोई मेरे लिए सिंपल अच्छा ट्रैवल एक्सपीरियंस क्यूरेट कर दे जो मेरी कॉस्ट बिल पे आ जाए, वो मेरे लिए ज़्यादा अच्छा है। बट क्योंकि मैं नहीं कहीं जा सकता है, इंडिया में मेरे लिए ट्रैवल करना ज़्यादा एक्सपेंसिव है, मैं इंस्टाग्राम में किसी सेलिब्रिटी की फ़ोटो देख के खुश होता रहता हूँ किसी गांव में कि यार वो और उसमें हर बार उसको देखता हूँ तो वो इंस्टाग्राम वाले के पैसे और वैल्यूएशन बढ़ती है। तो आई थिंक एट एन इंडिविजुअल लेवल वी हैव टू एक्चुअली स्टार्ट सॉल्विंग फॉर इंडियाज प्रॉब्लम्स. At the aggregate level, I think the government has to provide a little bit more proactive approach towards helping Indian businesses grow and try to address India's problems. We have unlike China, we opened our doors to everybody. So we are competing with all the other companies, etc. Because we suffered from during the tariff regime, during the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, we thought that an open market economy will allow us to get competitiveness, and it has, but it has also led that it has not allowed us to scale technologies and scale manufacturing where we can produce big enough businesses that can support and sustain themselves. So I think the answer lies in somewhere in the middle that we have to do.
Thank you for allowing this question. I'm the outsider here, and I'm grateful to the Presidential Secretariat and everyone who's invited me. Shaurya, excellent presentation. Question is there. Question is on energy deficit. But the statement before that, I'm an archaeologist and historian. You've given an excellent presentation linking up Artha with political, social, everything life. Energy deficit question, 85% deficit. I'm from Rajasthan, where a lot of experimental alternate energies come. What are the alternates available to us at this point? Alternate energy.
So, ma'am, good question. I think, ma'am, the answer to this is that we have to now, and this is something I am spending a lot of my time and energy, so I can speak to a little bit. We have to go for exponential technologies. We can't go for incremental solutions. We even tried with solar. Modi ji had the greatest ambition. We did, and we produced a lot of gigawatts of solar. But as I said, even by the time we did, the pendulum shifted so much that we went from 75 to 85. We have to find exponential technologies wherever in the world they exist, which gives us either a substitute for oil and coal or allow us to create greater productivity while reducing this thing. You know, we will find coal, we'll find alternate, that's fine. But we need now on a mission mode scale, finding solutions there, energy. We can live with higher productivity of energy, whether it's batteries, whether it's other rare earths, whether it's other minerals, where we can produce the quantum of energy, not today, but what we are going to need 10, 15, 20 years from now. So we've got to build highways of that scale. हम unfortunately अभी catching up game ही खेल रहे हैं. You know, it's like poverty. हम जितना भी कोशिश कर लें, हम अब एक आदमी है वो 14 घंटे के हम 16 घंटे काम कर लें, पर फिर भी पैसा 5 दिन में खत्म हो जाता है. तो you know वो that is the, we are chasing the tail. और ये हमारी पॉलिसी रही है over the last 75 years, which has allowed us to get to a point but get stuck. And that is why. So now we are really thinking कि अगले 10-15 साल में the only way out of this energy poverty, as it said, energy deficit, is to break through out of it, not try to fight it. We just have to, we have to take what we call as, you know, that defy gravity, you know, we have to, and go. And the only way to that is to find exponential technology, either in India, if people in India, our institute, or get it from wherever in the world. Buy it from wherever in the world and hyper scale it in India. हम algae को लेकर इतनी एनर्जी प्रोड्यूस कर सकते हैं कि हमको तेल की जरूरत ना हो. अमेरिका कभी नहीं ढूंढेगा. अमेरिका को क्या प्रॉब्लम है? अमेरिका तो हार्वर्ड ने ये काम करा, पर अगर हार्वर्ड में एक आदमी ये काम कर रहा है, हम उस आदमी को पकड़ के ले आए और उसको कहेंगे यार यहाँ हमारा इतना एल्गी है, मैं आपको एग्जांपल बता रहा हूँ, नॉर्थ टाइम, इससे हमारा एनर्जी ट्रांजिशन करा दे. ठीक है ना? दैट्स द काइंड ऑफ आंसर आई थिंक विल लीड टू अ थिंग. एंड आई थिंक, बट द गुड पॉइंट इज वी आर सीज्ड ऑफ द प्रॉब्लम and we are looking at it, but something like this will have to be done in my view.